I'm Edward Sanderson. We're at the Pritzker Military Museum and Library for the Holt Oral History Program, and today we have Dr. Lewis Flint, United States Army, here today with us. Thank you for coming out, sir.
Thank you for having me.
Today is the 4th of June, 2015, and today we are videotaping as well as audio taping. Are you okay with having both the video and audio tape, sir?
Fine.
Thank you very much. So we definitely dive into the questions, the fun stuff. Well, I can definitely tell you have a southern accent.
Yes.
So where are you from originally, sir?
Well, I was born in Atlanta, and spent most of my childhood in Rome, Georgia, because my dad was away in World War II.
Oh, nice. Definitely close to my parts. I'm from Eufaula, Alabama.
Oh, hey,
So,
yeah, not far away.
So we're definitely neighbors.
Yeah.
God knows I go through Atlanta a lot. Nice airport. Were you the oldest, young?
Only child.
The only child?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. So on that, you said that your dad was away in World War II. When was he in World War II?
Well, he graduated with an ROTC commission from Georgia Tech. He finished Georgia Tech in 1932 and then went back in the service late in 1940. They offered him the opportunity to stay in, so he became a career officer and retired in 1970.
What did he retire as?
Full colonel.
Full colonel?
Yeah.
Oh, nice. Did your family move around with him, or did you guys?
Yeah, we moved around a lot. He was away in World War II, and he was also away in the Korean War. And for a while, he was the senior military attaché to the Australian Army. Oh. So he was down there for a while, but when he came back, we lived in several places. North Carolina, Pennsylvania, but he had a total of 3 tours in Georgia at the place that no longer exists called the Atlanta General Depot, and at Fort McPherson.
Yeah, I remember when there. I actually remember as a little kid when they closed that part down. Because my uncle was in the reserves, the Army Reserves, and they were talking about that. I think they moved all that over to the there in right outside of Athens, for the, where the Navy has where their supply school is. I think they moved all that there.
Yeah, could have been. Yeah.
Where was your? What place was your favorite that you grew up
in? I think I enjoyed living in North Carolina, Fort Bragg. And it was an opportunity. My father was an avid Georgia Tech alumnus, so whenever Georgia Tech played Duke, we went up to Durham to the campus, and I became convinced I wanted to go to school there. So I was able to convince him and my mother that that would be better for me than Georgia Tech.
Oh, nice. Was he a little disappointed that his son was going to Duke versus Georgia Tech? Well,
I think he was, he thought it was a good way to keep the rivalry alive.
There you go. And especially Duke's got still, I think, I would have to say, still one of the premier med schools in the country.
It has a good reputation. I've always thought if you could have guilt by association, you ought to be able to have prestige by association too.
Oh, definitely.
And it's gotten a lot better since I was there. It was good when I went there, but it's gotten a lot better.
Oh, definitely. And was your dad was he an infantry officer, or was
he was a tank battalion commander in the 2nd Armored Division in World War II. And after the war, he got into the logistics and quartermaster part of it, and he had a big interest in education, and he became teacher at the quartermaster school at Fort Lee, Virginia, and served 2 tours there. The last one as the commander of the school.
Oh, nice.
And he finished up his career working at the Quartermaster General's office in Washington.
Oh, nice. With that, was after after you got done with your med school, was it one of those that he pushed you to join, or was it more of they drafted you?
Well, it at that particular time, if you had the MD degree, you had to do military service, or you had to do service in the public health service. The rule was that if you could practice medicine as a civilian, then you could practice medicine in the military. And there were several incentive programs. The one that I participated in was called the Early Commissioning Program. And so I was commissioned as a second lieutenant when I was a third-year medical student. And we went to monthly meetings of the reserve unit there in Durham, North Carolina, and then went to summer camp, usually either at the hospital at Fort Bragg or the hospital, can't remember the name of the installation. It's right outside of Columbia, South Carolina.
Oh, that's Fort Jackson.
Yeah, Fort Jackson. We either went to one of those places. Went to Fort Jackson right after my third year in medical school, and then just before I graduated, we went to summer camp at Fort Bragg.
Oh, nice. Definitely got to play in the hospital there in Fort Bragg, and played with Fort Bragg a few times. Definitely an interesting area.
Yes.
Got to go over there with the Marines with the artillery units. I think they have way too much fun. So, why did you want to go to med school and be a doc?
Well, it was I was inspired by the doctor who took care of me when I was growing up. He was in the era where they still made house calls, and he didn't take care of just one part of the family. He took care of the whole family. And he would have me come to his office every now and then and just watch what he did. And that's how I got interested in it.
Oh, nice. With your kind of going back with your mom during that time when you guys were moving around, was she pretty much like with the standard military family where the mother was the rock of the family, kind of kept things normal while the dad was gone? Or
yeah, she sort of took care of everything. She had a lot of sisters and brothers. She was one of 10 children. And so we sort of rotated around, staying with one or another of her sisters while my dad was away in World War II in Korea. And that's how we spent some time in Rome, Georgia, which was where one of her sisters and her husband, who worked for Southern Bell Telephone Company, was where he worked, was in Rome. And so we spent some time there, and my aunt started working on my dad to get him to consent to have me go to high school at Darlington School, which is there in Rome, which was an all-boys school at the time. And she finally convinced him that that was going to be the right thing to do. So I finished high school there in Rome, and so she was a big part of my life, along with my mom.
when you were in school, was there anything specifically you excelled at, like sports, or was it, or any kind of outdoor activities, or was it just more of academics?
Well, I played tennis in high school, and I wasn't ever very good at it. They had 6 people that played, and but they had 8 people on the team, and I was number 7 or number 8, and it was fun, but only got to play in one match, I think. Mostly at Darlington, you had to take care of your academics, and I had the honor of serving as the social chairman for the school for my junior year and my senior year. So I got to get involved in planning all the dances and stuff like that, so that was fun.
Oh, nice. How was it trying to formulate a dance with an all-boys school? Did you have to contact like the various schools in the area?
Well, there was a girls' prep school there, and you know, the girls from the public schools, they enjoyed coming out to the parties, and so it was never hard to get everybody dates.
Oh, there you go. You're probably the most popular person on campus.
Yeah.
When your father was deployed, was there ever any time where you guys would go long periods of time without contact with him, or?
No, he was pretty good about keeping in touch, even though he was, you know, a long ways away. I don't know exactly what he did. I know his specialty was logistics, but he had some duties that he couldn't talk about, and so we never knew very much about them. But no, he was not out of touch. He was, you know, wrote regularly, and when he could call, he called.
Oh, nice. Especially definitely during those days where it's pretty much letter, and if you didn't get a letter in, you know, or one of those where they didn't have time to write letters, a lot of times families would go for days without hearing, or go for days or weeks without hearing anything about their family member. How would you describe your time at med school?
It was a lot of fun. You know, we had our class was very cohesive, and we all were friends with each other, and medical school is a competitive place, so people competed to see who was going to be the best at what they could be. And if we found out that one of our classmates was close to breaking one of the academic records, then we would do whatever we had to do to help that person break the record.
Oh, nice.
I remember one example. We had one member of our class who was on the verge of having the highest grade point average in the history of the medical school.
Oh.
And as part of one of the final examinations, you had to prepare slides of blood smears. Mm-hmm. That was in the days where you'd take 2 cover glasses and a drop of blood and put the one cover glass down on top of the other one and pull them apart to make the blood smear. Mm-hmm. And he had been up all night studying, and he had a terrible tremor. So 3 or 4 of us got together and did all of his blood smears for him. And he wound up getting the highest grade point average in the history of the medical school.
Oh, very nice. Do you still keep in contact with him?
I haven't talked to him in quite a while. I run into some of my classmates who are surgeons. I run into them, maybe once or twice a year. And we're going to have our 50th reunion in November, so I think a bunch of people will try to get together for that.
It'd be good to probably see some old friends,
yeah.
Especially with, does he still have the highest grade point average?
I don't know the answer to that. I would doubt that it's held up for 50 years, but you never know.
Yeah. That's pretty awesome knowing that, that you helped someone maintain and get the highest grade point average in the school's history.
Well, it was, as I said, it was a lot of fun. We enjoyed being with each other, and we socialized together and had dinners, and it made the studying part easier.
Oh, definitely. What year did you graduate med school?
I finished at the end of September 1964. I didn't go through my graduation ceremony until June of 1965, but between the time I finished my coursework and the time that the graduation occurred, I did an initial year of residency in internal medicine. And that was when I just found out that I truly wanted to be a surgeon and not an internal medicine person. Did the internal medicine year primarily because I was invited to do that, and it was a great honor to be invited to do something like that. So, and it was fun, but I found out that all the interesting medicine patients were on the surgery service. So when I graduated, then that July I started in surgery.
And definitely surgery is a little bit more fun. Internal med, yeah, can get pretty boring after a while. Yeah, definitely the surgery and critical care is more fun on that side. Where did you do your surgery intern?
At Duke.
At Duke?
Mm-hmm.
And then, how long were you at Duke before you were drafted into the Army?
I did 2 years of surgery training and entered the service on the 8th of August of 1967.
Where did, when you were brought into the military, where exactly did they bring you into it?
At Fort Sam Houston, Texas.
Okay. And was that when you had your initial officer corps training during that time frame?
Yeah, the medical officer training, the basic course was 8 weeks long, and mostly it was some introduction to the way that the military medical service operated, and it was some basic instruction on what you needed to do to be an Army officer, and how to wear the uniform, how to keep your hair cut, and how not to insult your superiors and that sort of thing. So we had, as is probably true in the other branches of the service, the sergeants run the service. The officers, if they're smart, let the sergeants run things. And we had some really good sergeants who were our instructors in the officers' basic course, and they did their best to make it fun.
Did you, during that time, were you like a squad leader or division commander? Did you have any?
No, they actually didn't have us in any kind of command or supervisory role. We were split into groups of 14 people, and we had a sergeant who was the leader of our group, and that was all the hierarchy there was. I think they were doing their best to make the transition easy. I had been introduced to what it was like to behave in the military because I'd been in the reserve, but most of the folks who were in the class had not been in the reserve, so they were pretty new to the experience, and some of them didn't have any idea about what it was going to be like. So the sergeants really worked hard to make it as easy as possible.
Oh, nice. Did you guys stay in a barracks, or where is it?
No, they let us get apartments, and so we lived off base after the daily work was done.
Oh, nice.
And they, you did the mandatory 4-day out at, I've forgotten the name of the camp that's outside of.
Camp Bullis.
Yeah, Camp Bullis. We did the 4-day camp out at Camp Bullis, and to get used to living outdoors and living in tents and stuff like that, and which was something we had done in summer camp as reservists, so that was not an entirely new experience. And since we were all doctors, we were pretty much all spoke the same language, so it really wasn't a hard training course. It was more, this is what you need to do to get along, and because for the vast majority of physicians who were entering the service at that time, you had a 2-year commitment. And the sergeants and the people in charge of the training course, they realized that, that you were there and you were going to do what you needed to do for 2 years, but that you weren't going to be in the Army forever. And and to an extent, that was an advantage, because you had a lot of really smart people, and you didn't have to subject them to being in an unpleasant environment for month after month after year like they do now. I have friends who are surgeons. Actually, I have two good friends who are surgeons who have done multiple deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan. They both have struggled with post-traumatic stress disorder. And I think that is in part because of the need to do repeated deployments. We didn't have to do that. And I am prejudiced to believe that the quality of the medical care in the military in that era was very good, because in part of the fact that people knew they weren't going to be there for more than 2 years. I think the combat medical care nowadays is outstanding. They have taken the lessons that were learned in World War II in Korea and Vietnam, and then combined those with the lessons that have been learned in the civilian trauma systems, and then taken that to the combat area and made it better, and taken all the good parts of all those experiences, blended them with the current military medical experience, and created what is an unbelievable injury care system. It is, when I think of the fact that, that we took care of patients in Vietnam who stayed with us for 3, 4, 5 months before they could be evacuated to the United States, and what the average stay in Afghanistan now is 36 hours. So, and they're doing operations in those aircraft that they're evacuating patients in. They're doing surgical procedures inside the airplane. So it's gotten developed to a really spectacular level. And while I hope every day that the war ends, but the fact of the matter is that the quality of that casualty care system is not going to be maintained without investment of a lot of resources, and I'm afraid that once the war is over, then those resources aren't going to be there.
Amen to that one. Hopefully it's one of those resources continue. That's definitely one of the things that looking back, you can see how when you guys got done in Vietnam, how there was not, you didn't have that continuity of care.
Right.
Once you're out, all right, see ya. Now it's more of they've become a lot better of trying to make sure that once someone's out of the military that they still have some continuity of care. A lot better than what it's been.
Them.
And definitely a lot of it's owed to you all that was there beforehand, especially in Vietnam. Because looking at the statistics, it's almost mind-boggling how, a life expectancy, in the battlefield casualty rate in World War II and Korea, and how over the years it just got better and better. In Vietnam, went to almost a 98%, well, definitely in the 90s. I believe I saw something was a 97% casualty survival rate, and now it's gotten even better, especially
Right.
through the efforts of the American, College of Surgeons and the various other organizations that are just making it to the point now with the type of medical training we receive. It's almost to the point where we do full-blown surgeries there on the battlefield, where it was still kind of limited a few, even 60 years ago, 50 years ago.
Right.
When you got done with Fort Sam Houston, well, kind of going back to when you were there, what did you all do during your downtime? Was it just a normal type of day, or did y'all do anything special?
Well, we got together with some folks, and I had 2 medical school classmates who were in my officers class. So I had a group of people that we could hang out with. We played tennis and played basketball, and there were a lot of pretty good places to eat in San Antonio. So especially if you liked Mexican food and barbecue. So we'd go out to eat, and we kind of got the impression that we were sort of looked down upon if we went to the officers club, that these are guys who are just going to be here for 2 years, so they're not really Army, and so we would kind of get the impression that you weren't entirely welcome at the officers club, so we didn't spend a lot of time there. But the evening after we'd had our graduation ceremony, they had a party for us at the officers club, and that was fun.
Right. What day did you arrive? When did you leave to go to Vietnam?
Well, after I finished at Fort Sam Houston, I was transferred to Fort Bragg, and they wanted to. The perception was that they needed anesthesiologists, and so they were training people with doing 3-month courses in anesthesia, and that's what they asked me to do. So I went to Fort Bragg, and I did the anesthesia training most of the time, but I wound up doing medical services support work for the 82nd Airborne and for the Special Forces groups there. So I would go out on camping trips with those guys occasionally. I had to tell the major that I was working with in the 82nd that he had to write on paper that I was not going to be required to jump out of an airplane. He was good enough to agree to that. So after doing that for about 3 months, right after Christmas in 1967, I got my orders to go to Vietnam. They gave me 4 weeks off before I had to leave, and so I got my family settled, and I left for Vietnam, I think on the 10th or 12th of January 1968.
And were you married at this point, or?
Yes.
Okay. When did you get married?
In 1964.
Oh, okay. Where did your wife and family stay at? Did they
Well,
stay?
my wife was getting her master's degree in nursing, and she was going to American University in Washington, D.C. to get her master's degree. So we got her an apartment in Washington, and so she went to school while I was in Vietnam.
Mm-hmm. Did she ever serve in the military? Or?
No.
We did notice, when you were assigned to the 71st evac.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, as with everybody, you flew into Long Binh to the MACV headquarters, and they dispersed you from there. So we spent a couple of days in Long Binh, and they told us about right after dinner, on the second day we were there, that we would be leaving about 10 o'clock that night to go up to it's on the place on the coast. They did the TV show there.
China Beach?
Yeah, they did China Beach there.
Mm-hmm.
But we flew up there that night. We got to the Air Force Base there about midnight, and it was an interesting experience. They opened the back doors to the aircraft, and the pilot said, "I'd appreciate it if you'd get out as quickly as you can, because we need to leave. The airfield's under attack." So they pulled a truck up there, and so we all got out, and the guys in the truck helped us get all our stuff up in the truck and loaded us up and took us to the hospital there, and we spent the night in the hospital. And the next day I got to meet with the medical group commander, and he told me that he was sending me to the 71st Evac Hospital, which was about 60 miles away. It was in Pleiku, that was sort of up in the mountains, and we were down on the coast. But so I got a helicopter ride up to the 71st and arrived there, I think, the beginning of the third week in January. It was 4 days before the 1968 Tet Offensive started. But it turned out to be one of the best things that ever happened to me, because there were 3 of us there who were partially trained. All of us had been in university surgery residency programs before we entered the service. And as it turned out, the hospital commander, Colonel Dave Green, had been, before he came to Vietnam, the residency training program director in surgery at Walter Reed. And so he got all 3 of us in his office, and he said, "I'm going to make sure that you gentlemen are have an experience that is very much like your residency in surgery. So you're going to be on call every 3rd day." And there were 11 surgeons there that were general surgeons, and we also had a neurosurgeon, we had 2 orthopedic surgeons, we had an otolaryngologist, and interestingly enough, an OBGYN specialist who took care of the nurses, but he also took care of a lot of the Vietnamese women who came in there with complicated pregnancies. And we had 2 oral and maxillofacial surgeons that were dentists, but they were surgeons. And I can tell you that they were absolutely the best help in the operating room I have ever had anywhere. And we had a bunch of really talented corpsman who helped us out, and a bunch of good nurses. It was a terrific educational experience for me. It took 6 months for the Army to find out that they had assigned partially trained surgeons to the 71st Evac, and that was against the rules. Mm. So after we'd been there about 6 months, they dispersed us out to the infantry. Mm. But during that 6 months, I did 430 operations. And we had an interesting time when the Tet Offensive started. On the second day of the Tet Offensive, they started bringing us casualties in Chinook helicopters that were capable of bringing in 55 casualties at the time. And so we worked pretty hard. We had a very talented pathologist who went to the commander of the Pleiku Air Base. The hospital was on the corner of the air base. And our pathologist went to the commander of the Pleiku Air Base and asked him if he would be able to supply people to donate blood. And he said, sure. He said, just call and tell us how many you want. So this pathologist would harvest units of blood from 100 to 120 of these soldiers in the course of about 8 hours. Wow. And so we never ran out of blood. And as you may know, it is fashionable nowadays to begin whole blood very early in the resuscitation process. And we were doing that at the 71st Evacuation Hospital in Vietnam. We had no idea why we were doing it. We just knew the blood was available. Ah. And sometimes we had more blood than we had IV fluids, because we were occasionally in short supply because we were taking so many casualties. And so we did early blood resuscitation, and we weren't smart enough to figure it out. But looking back on it, we had very few episodes of post-injury coagulation abnormalities and bleeding. And it may have been because we were given early blood transfusion. I don't know, but it's interesting how that's turned out. But on the fourth day of the Tet Offensive, we did 220 operations under general anesthesia in 24 hours. Wow. And we had one big operating room with 10 operating tables in it, and then we had another room that had 20 stretchers in it where we did minor cases. And we had anesthesiologists who, in the room with 20 stretchers, they would just go down the row giving anesthetic nerve blocks so that we could do wound debridements and that sort of thing. And it was a highly efficient operation.
Sounds like it, especially I couldn't even fathom taking care of that many patients in a short amount of time.
We had one intensive care unit, had 40 beds in it, and for the 40 beds we had one respirator and no artificial kidney machines, even though the artificial kidney had been developed in the Korean War. We didn't have access to that. We had to send the patients either to Long Ben or to Saigon, to the 3rd Field Hospital, to get dialysis. We didn't have it available at the 71st. But we had just about everything else available. And and as I said, the surgical education experience was fantastic. I found out when I got back to the United States and started my formal residency that I had done more craniotomies than the senior resident in neurosurgery had done. And he pointed out to me that his were elective and for complicated problems like aneurysms and brain tumors and that sort of thing, and all I was doing was taking a blood clot out and washing out the debris. And I said, yeah, that's true, but that's fine. As I said, it was a wonderful educational experience, and it was interesting that one of my medical school classmates, who turned out to become a neurosurgeon, was with the 1st Infantry Division in Vietnam, and when I left the 71st, I was assigned to be the commander of Bravo Company, 1st Medical Battalion, the 1st Infantry Division. It was the post that he left. And he actually got assigned to the 71st. They made another mistake and assigned a partially trained surgeon to the 71st. But he has just published a book about his experiences called Sword and Scalpel. His name is Larry Rogers. But he's a great person. And we were really good friends during medical school.
Definitely talking about swapping careers on that one. That would definitely be interesting. When what was some of the thoughts that when you first got there, and especially during the course of taking care of that many patients? Basically, and here you are, still in a residency program, still kind of new to the game, and all of a sudden, almost like a trial by fire of, hey, here's all these patients, have fun.
Well, it was not exactly like that, because all of the senior surgeons who were there had been either trained in university programs or in military hospitals. Mm-hmm. They were all used to teaching residents, and they knew that you just didn't leave a resident by himself. Mm-hmm. You sort of hung around. And so they were not ever far away. So we weren't out on a limb by ourselves. And it got to be pretty lonely when you were with the infantry, because you were having to provide the initial care for some very badly injured people while you waited for the helicopter to come to evacuate them. And you really didn't have any senior help then. All you had was the medics, they were very, very good. We've always said that if you have an experienced medic or an experienced nurse and they hand you an instrument, you better find something to do with it, because it's what you need whether you realize it or not. And so we had a lot of help there. It was we were never. We were sometimes short of supplies, mm-hmm. but we were never short of brain power to help us. And we didn't operate by ourselves. They let us do cases, but there was always a senior surgeon there to help us.
Outstanding. I know during the during some of the research, the 67th out of Quin Yon had sent some relief nurses and doctors to help out. Were you able to interact with any of the members of the 67th?
There were a couple who worked with us. They sent them actually to several hospitals, because Quin Yon was actually the airport we flew into, what I was referring to before. There were two other hospitals, one south of Quin Yon and one north, that were on the coast, and they sent surgeons there. There were really one surgeon and two nurses from Quin Yon who came to the 71st. And I think they stayed with us for a couple of weeks. But I did not actually get to work with the surgeon very closely. We were sort of teamed up with one or more of the group of 11 surgeons who were there all the time, and The surgeon who was with us temporarily, they were there to help out, and they knew they weren't going to be a permanent part of the team, so they were just kind of there doing what they could to make things easier for us. But I didn't get to interact closely with them at all.
Okay. And one of the reasons why I also brought that up was we've done an interview with Diana Ramsey,
Mm-hmm.
and at the time Diana Marshall, and she was actually sent up to the 71st during the same time.
Right.
And when she had brought that up, we did a little research on that, and like, yeah, wondering, it'd be an interesting thing if you two had actually probably met during that time frame.
Yeah, we may have. You know, you meet a lot of neat people, and I don't remember all of them, but
Right.
I do remember that I'm not sure what we would have done without the nurses. I mean, they were just terrific help.
And she actually eventually, one of the anesthesiologists at the 67th, she actually eventually married him.
Oh, good.
So definitely, it's always interesting finding some of the friendships and relationships that develop in a war
Yeah.
zone. Some they last forever, and some like, okay, but you can see them 20, 30 years later, and it's like you just got through talking to each other.
Well, I had the opportunity to have a conversation with Dave Green, who was the hospital commander about a year ago. Actually, it's closer to 2 years ago now, and he's still doing pretty good. So got a chance to thank him for all he did, and I don't think I realized how much it was going to help me at the time, but it really was a pivotal point in my career.
Definitely sounds like you received a lot of good training, and that's definitely you definitely put it to good use, especially with your continued career. After 6 months, you said that you became the company commander of Alpha Company 4th Med Battalion, and then also Bravo at 1st Med 1st Infantry.
Yeah, I actually was in Alpha Company of the 4th. Right after the Tet Offensive sort of calmed down a little bit, the surgeon who was the commander of Alpha Company came down with hepatitis, and they weren't going to be able to get a replacement for about 3 weeks. So I went up to, they were in Quan Loy at the time, and which was very close to Khartoum, which was still a very hotly contested place. So I went up and replaced him, and that was not as much fun as being at 71st, but was still an interesting experience. They had widened a road to make it possible for aircraft to land in this area, and when I think about it, it was sort of like being on the football field in the Rose Bowl, and the Viet Cong were up in the stands, and they would just occasionally lob things down on top of us. And I remember that our first sergeant for the company almost cried because he had spent a lot of effort getting all the materials together to build a shower where we had our aid station. And it had been finished for, I think, 48 hours when a shell hit it and blew it to smithereens. So, poor guy, I really felt sorry for him.
Yeah, especially something like that. Boy. Yeah.
But the other thing he had built was a bunker. And so we were down in this bunker, and perfectly safe. It was far enough down so that there wasn't any shell that the Viet Cong had that would get to us. But when we came back up, there were nothing but pieces of the shower out there, and he took it hard.
How many were you the only when you were at the infantry units? Were you the only doctor there, or?
No, there were usually 3 of us who were doctors at Alpha Company in the 4th Medical Battalion. One of the other 2 doctors had been in pediatrics training, and the third had been in internal medicine training. So I was the only person with any surgical training there. When I got to Bravo Company of the 1st Medical Battalion, one of the other 2 doctors was a psychiatrist who had been in his psychiatry training before he came to the military, and the third one had been in a urology residency, so he had had some surgery training.
What was it like? Well, how many how many people were you in command of? And,
the medical company had 4 officers. There were 3 doctors and then a medical service corps officer who was kind of our administrator. We had a mess sergeant and his crew. We had probably close to a platoon and a half, maybe about 50 enlisted guys. And they weren't all medics. They, did the maintenance for the buildings and for the equipment, and they drove the trucks and took care of getting us supplied and all that kind of stuff. But so all of them were not medical people. But I was fortunate to have a supremely talented first sergeant who, unfortunately, after I had been there about 3 months, he was promoted to sergeant major and became the sergeant major for the medical command in Long Bend. And that was bad. It was bad to lose him, as his replacement was an older gentleman who was pretty much just kind of living out his time. He was just getting ready to retire. And so he wasn't very interested in taking an active role in leading the men or taking care of their problems and that sort of thing. So, it was tough for a couple of months. But the good part of it was that when I got ready to go home, the sergeant major heard that I was going to have to ride in a Jeep from Lycata down to Long Bend, and he arranged for a helicopter to come pick me up. And then I stayed in a room in the first sergeant's barracks in Long Bend, which, believe me, was palatial. And they gave me a ride out to the airport and then got me on the airplane and everything to go home. So I had a really great experience with him. He taught me a lot about how to interact with people and how to, get people to do what you needed them to do. I don't think I'll ever forget him.
Did you ever have any contact with him after the military?
No, no, we've never crossed paths. Just after I got back to the States, I was assigned to Fort Belvoir in Virginia, where they wanted me to be an anesthesia person, and I hadn't done it for the whole time I'd been in Vietnam, so they sort of had to retrain me. And by the time they got me retrained, I was ready to be discharged. But the way it was then was that that you were in the military, you gave it what you need to give it while you were in the military, but you knew that there was going to be a time when you were done. and you were going to continue with whatever career that you were in. And for me, that meant going back to being a surgery resident. And when you are a surgery resident, that's pretty much a full-time job, and you don't have a lot of time to keep up with people, unfortunately. No, we never made contact after I shook his hand outside his quarters on the way to the airport.
Definitely is. No, definitely is. It's one of those that on the Navy side of the house we have the chiefs run the Navy, and kind of like how on the Army side the sergeants run the Army. But for him to pick up the phone and say, "Nah, we're going to do this," that definitely meant that he truly liked you, sir. It was, that meant that.
Well, it was mutual. He came to me when I arrived at Bravo Company and said, Dr. Flint, he said, "I'm here to do whatever you need for me to do." And I said, "I only need you to do one thing, First Sergeant, and that's to make sure I don't make any mistakes." Because my father had told me that, when you have a good sergeant, you let them do things.
There you
go. And he took care of me. Yeah, that was for sure.
Outstanding. And when you were getting ready to leave, well, actually, kind of one question I did have during that time, did yourself and the other doctors do any specialized training with the corpsmen that were at the battalion aid station? Did y'all do anything to try to hone their skills a little bit more? Or?
There were actually two clearing stations. There were one on each side of the airstrip at Lyke. And we would get together with the doctors in the other clearing station and use their talents to help train the corpsmen from both units. And so we did courses on rapid control of bleeding. We did courses on initial management of wounds. We did courses on recognizing symptoms of snake bite, because that was actually a relatively common problem in that part of Vietnam. And we worked with the medics that were assigned to the dust-off helicopter unit that was located next to one of the clearing stations to help them get patients ready for evacuation, make sure that that fractures were well splinted and the patients were fixed on the stretcher so that they wouldn't move around very much during the flight. So we did some education, but it was combined. We didn't do unit-specific education because we were trying to maximize the talent that we had and get as many people involved in the educational programs as we could. The medical battalion commander was actually across the street from us in there were some tents that were sort of the division headquarters area, and he was in that area, and he was very interested in training and getting the most effective results that we could from the training effort. So he helped us organize the courses and make sure that we had the necessary equipment and stuff like that to do the training.
Outstanding. Yeah, that's definitely one of the things that I always trust a doctor or a nurse that loves to do the training. The ones that don't want to do the training, I'm like, unfortunately, I think you've probably seen some of that as well.
Right.
Over the course of your time. Now, at the BA, when you guys were at the BAS, were there times where y'all would have to do minor surgeries?
Yeah, it was mostly For the troops, it was mostly, splint fractures, get the wounds bandaged up, make sure the bleeding stopped, and get them evacuated. For some of the local people who would wander into the area, we'd have people that would have abscesses, and we actually did when we had a nurse anesthetist who was with us briefly. We did a couple of appendectomies, but that was very unusual. But we did drain some abscesses, and we'd take care of some wounds that these folks had. We had a Montagnard village that was pretty close to us, and we would go out to them. What they wanted more than anything else was our dentist, because none of them had ever had any dental care. And so the way it turned out was that we might see a child with a sore throat or a child with an earache or something like that, but the dentist would probably see 15, 20, 30 patients while we were out in the villages. And most of the time, the first sergeant would say, now, everybody keep your eyes open. If the women start to pick up the children, we're about to get ambushed. So just keep your eyes open, make sure we don't get surprised. And, the only surprise we had was we had to move the company headquarters out of Lac and up to another location that was not really a village. It was sort of in between villages, and so the only time we ever got close to being in any kind of trouble other than in the Tet Offensive, where there was some disagreement over who owned our real estate there at the 71st, was moving from Lac to this other location. We got sort of peripherally involved in an ambush, and I remember that when we got to the new location, the sergeant who was driving the Jeep came in and said, Doc, come on out, I want to show you something. And in the spare tire on the back of the Jeep, there was a bullet that had hit the spare tire.
uh-oh.
So, that was not really thrilling to find out that you were that close to getting shot by somebody who maybe weighed 90 pounds and didn't have any idea who you were.
Right. And that's I can definitely hear on that one. Having something like that, you just you kind of breathe, take a deep breath, and you almost don't want to kind of think about it, and just like, okay, just kind of almost like you just want to continue on about smartly. When you left Vietnam, when was this?
It was in January of 1969.
Okay. And did you go directly home, or did you go directly to Fort Belvoir?
Well, I met my wife at her home, which is her family's home, which was in Philadelphia, and then we lived in the apartment she was living in Washington. I guess we were at Fort Belvoir for about 5 months. And then, I had decided while I was in Vietnam that I wanted to take care of injured people. And so I spoke to Dr. Sabiston, who was the chief of surgery at Duke, and he said, what do you want to do? And I said, I want to be a trauma surgeon. He said, I have to be truthful with you. He said, Duke is not a very good place to learn to be a trauma surgeon. And he said, I would like to suggest some better places. And he suggested several places, but the place that I decided on was the Medical University of South Carolina in Charleston for two reasons. The chair of surgery there, Dr. Arts, was a leading burn and injury surgeon. And there was another surgeon there named John Moncrief, who had been the commander of the burn unit at Fort Sam Houston. And his brother had actually been the commander of the Fort Bragg Hospital when I was assigned there. So I had gotten to know his brother. And they had faculty there who, all of whom had some interest in injury care. And so it turned out to be the best possible follow-up to Vietnam for me. And I was able to finish my training there in the middle. I did a 2-year research fellowship at the University of Texas Southwestern in Dallas, where they were building on the experience that people had had in Vietnam with resuscitation of blood loss. And coming up with some really terrific ideas about how to maximize the benefit of resuscitation of blood loss. So that was a lot of fun, and it really prepared me for a career where my main focus has been on care of injured patients.
Outstanding. When you finished your fellowship at the University of Texas in Dallas, where did you go to from there?
I had one year of training left at the medical university, so I went back and I finished my training there. I after I finished training, I became the first director of the Charleston County Emergency Medical Services System. That was in 1974. The Emergency Medical Services System Act, which was passed by Congress, that provided money for municipalities to buy ambulances and train emergency medical technicians. That had been passed in 1973, so Charleston had been awarded a grant to do that. So I became the first medical director, and we started training emergency medical technicians and deploying ambulances and trying to make sure that they were doing what they needed to do. I did that for a year and then was recruited to the University of Louisville, which was another major trauma area. It was the first, Louisville General Hospital was the first hospital to have a unit that combined a resuscitation unit, radiology, and an operating room and intensive care unit. That was created at the Louisville General Hospital in 1966. I got there in 1974, and they had a long-running tradition of being really on the forefront of injury care.
Oh, nice. So it definitely sounds like you got in the right places at the right time.
Well, there's an old rule in academic surgery that, if you want to have the best chance for success, because all academic surgeons work hard. There's not any of us that don't work hard. So if you want to have the best chance of success, you hitch your wagon to a star. And the gentleman who was chairman of surgery at the University of Louisville was one of the rising stars in American surgery.
Outstanding. Definitely. And what brought you? What eventually brought you up here to Chicago into the American College of Surgeons?
Well, that's an interesting story. When I was a trauma fellow at the University of Texas, there was a faculty member there named Dr. Robert McClelland, who was very interested in reviewing the medical literature and summarizing it for the residents so that they did not have to plow through huge amounts of information to get the information they needed. Mm-hmm. So he would tear articles out of journals, staple them together, copy them, and put them together with a typed summary of the articles on a single topic, and then present that at a journal club for the residents. And so he asked me and the surgeon I was sharing a laboratory with if we would help him put the articles together. And in return, he would give us each a set of the articles and the summary and let us come to the journal club. So I got involved in that, and in 1974, the year after I left the University of Texas, he made that a national subscription service called Selected Readings in General Surgery. In late 2004, when he was getting ready to retire, he gave the intellectual property rights for Selected Readings to the American College of Surgeons. And they started recruiting an editor for the publication, and I was fortunate enough to get the job.
Outstanding.
And that's what brought us to Chicago.
Outstanding. And since you've been working with that, are you still practicing? Do you still get in the OR?
No, no. I go to conferences over at Northwestern, but I haven't taken care of patients in 8 years.
Do you miss it?
I don't miss the telephone ringing in the middle of the night. I can tell you that. I am fortunate that there are a lot of Northwestern medical students and residents who live in my building. So I get to talk to them. We walk to work together, and I get to talk to them about what they're doing, what's going on. And so I get to keep up a little bit, but I really had such a great time in my professional career taking care of patients that when I finished doing that, I wanted to leave that with good memories, and so I don't want to take a chance on having it become a bad memory.
Yeah, definitely on that one. And kind of going like we were talking before, I know with a lot of the work that that you've done previously, and especially with the College of Surgeons, especially when it comes down to with the like I was saying, we have the Tactical Combat Casualty Care course that we go in OEMS, the Operational Emergency Medical course. I know they have really relied a lot on the American College of Surgeons for the input on a lot of that.
Right. Well, I got involved with the Committee on Trauma in the American College of Surgeons at the time that the Advanced Trauma Life Support course was being developed. And I got my certificate in the second course that was ever given, and was able to work through 3 or 4 iterations of the Advanced Trauma Life Support manual. One of my best friends in surgery wanted to export that concept to pre-hospital care. So he started developing what became the pre-hospital trauma life support course. And both of those courses have been extremely successful. And when I mentioned earlier that I think what has happened for the current understanding of optimal combat casualty care has been the lessons of previous wars, combined with the lessons learned in civilian trauma systems that became, the trauma system business started in the early 1970s, and the first state trauma system was in Illinois. and the second one was in Maryland. And we don't have enough state trauma systems yet, but we have a lot more than we used to have. And I think the approach to combat injury care has been to take the lessons from the previous wars and the lessons from the civilian trauma systems and optimize that for management of combat casualties. Now, I used to have to tell medical students and residents all the time, I said, you know, you have seen injured patients, but you've never seen anything like a combat injury. I said, you take the patient that we took care of last night and you multiply that injury severity by 10, and that's a combat injury. Mm-hmm. And that's hard for them to grasp. You know, it's hard to grasp how badly injured people are from combat, and particularly with the explosive devices that they have now. Mm-hmm. You know, we had the advantage of having an early warning system most of the time, and you know, we knew during the Tet Offensive, we knew when an attack was coming, mm-hmm. because two things would happen. The radar at the Air Force Base would pick up a rocket when it was launched, and they would tell us, you know, they've just launched a rocket. And about 15 seconds later, we would hear the sound of the launch. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, we knew something was coming. That advantage is frequently not present in current combat care, mm-hmm. Because you may know that you've stepped on an IED, and you know at that time that when you take your foot off of it, it's going to explode. Mm-hmm. And so most of the time what the guys do is they say, you know, I just stepped on an IED, everybody get out of the way. Mm-hmm. And they unfortunately wind up with these mutilating leg injuries and arm injuries, and I think in a lot of respects the surgical care of combat injuries has gotten somewhat easier because the injury is so severe that you can't do any repair. Mm-hmm. You know, there's some situations where you may be able to salvage the extremity, but often all you can do is complete the amputation, stop the bleeding, and get them on to a place where they can be rehabilitated. Mm-hmm. So in some ways, the surgical care of the patient has gotten easier. Mm-hmm. And I wonder, when I've sat down and talked to my friends who've had trouble with post-traumatic stress disorder, I wonder if the fact that they had it because they never really got to see the patient get well. Hmm. You know, they only got to see the patient while they were very sick. Mm-hmm. And, you know, the reward for a surgeon comes with seeing the patient get well. Mm-hmm. But I think the intensity of the experience, the fact they have to repeat it over and over again and be separated from family and that sort of thing, has made the post-traumatic stress problem significant for doctors who are returning from combat, as well as the individuals who've been involved in the combat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that definitely, you know, 10 years ago, communications were still slow. Nowadays, communications is so fast that a lot of times, you know, when I've noticed, even when I was out there, you would have people dealing with stuff along those lines, but also that one phone, used to it'd be one phone call every couple of weeks, once a month, depending on whenever you can get a line out. Now some people are calling home almost every night. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times, you know, coupled with that, and yeah, it's definitely nowadays, you know, we get them, do what we can, stop the bleeding, basically keep the patient alive as much as possible, put them on the first C-130 out of there, or yeah. C-17.
Well, it's, yeah, I remember that in Vietnam we used to wait for the 8-track tapes to come in that our family had recorded their messages on, and we would then erase it and then record our message and send it back.
Yep. Now it's yeah. People almost kind of freak out when they go what we call in the River City, when they shut down the communications. You know, and people are like, oh my God, I can't email anybody. And just like, I'd be like, thank God. I'd be happy. I was like,
Right.
I'm good. And everybody's like, why not? Well, why aren't you happy? And I'm like, well, aren't you sad? Why are you happy? I was like, that means I don't have to answer 20 emails tonight when we get off.
Right.
Yeah, I can kick back and actually get some sleep for once. So, but we definitely appreciate all the work that the American College of Surgeons has done, because, like I said, it's definitely helped, you know, a lot on our end.
We formalized a relationship about a year ago. We now have a military liaison at the college who's a surgeon. Dr. Peggy Knudsen, who's worked for a long time with the military. And she is working very hard to develop a partnership that will be focused on preservation of knowledge and skills, so that we can do our best to make sure that what has been learned is not forgotten, and that we can make sure that the surgeons who've served in the military have a chance to share their knowledge. And I think one other important thing that may come out of this, I'm hopeful that it'll come out of this, is the fact that if we combine the resources of the active military medical staff, the Veterans Administration Medical Services staff, and civilian trauma systems, we can probably deliver care to almost every veteran wherever they are. You know, right now, distance is somewhat of a problem for people who, you know, maybe they may live 100 miles from the nearest VA. And so getting there is difficult. But if they could go to their nearest trauma center, which may, you know, even in places like Wyoming and Montana, there is a trauma center about every 45 or 50 or 60 miles. So if they could go to a knowledgeable surgeon rehabilitation person at the trauma center, then they might not have to go to the VA. So I'm hopeful that one of the things that'll come out of this is that we'll get cooperation between the Veterans Health Services, the active duty military medical services, and the trauma systems, so that we can not only make sure that what's been learned is not forgotten, but we can make sure that people who need care get it. And that's been the target of trauma systems all along, is the right care to the right patient at the right time. And I think we are within striking distance of having that for, especially for folks who've served in the recent conflicts.
Outstanding. That would be awesome. That would definitely help a lot. And that was bringing to it now. You're still currently an adjunct professor at Northwestern, correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
And is it one of those that, you know, what's some of the key things that you like to pass on to the students?
Well, what I spend a lot of time telling them is that there's never been a better time to be a doctor than right now. And there's never been a better time to be a surgeon than right now, because the things that they are able to do for patients, using things like molecular medicine and genomic typing, and using the knowledge that we've learned from combat casualty care, and using the advances in technology that are available for surgical instruments nowadays, that I tell them, I said, you're going to get to do things for patients that I used to just dream about. So I said, I'm envious. And if you want to do something really good for me to make me even more envious. That's the consistent message that I try to transmit, that they shouldn't listen to all this stuff about doctor burnout and the problems with the electronic medical record and the the difficulties that doctors have being employed and student debt and stuff like that. I said, those are problems, yeah, but you became a doctor to solve problems. And focus on the fact instead that you've got the opportunity to really do some great things for patients. And the rewards you get from that's going to be so important to you over the long haul that it'll make all these other problems tolerable.
Amen to that one. Do you think your service in Vietnam helped to kind of propel you to go towards a professorship?
It was a major influence, yeah. I had known that I wanted to be a surgeon, and I hadn't really decided what kind of surgeon I wanted to be before I went to Vietnam, but I figured out about 2/3 of the way through the Tet Offensive that I wanted to spend my career taking care of injured people.
Nice.
And it helped that I had one surgeon that I worked very closely with who worked in a community hospital in Durham. And the community hospital was the place where injured patients got taken. They didn't get taken to Duke. And so I had some experience before I went to Vietnam covering emergency call with him. And I remember now that there was a thought that sort of got planted deep in my brain from working with him that, doing this emergency stuff is really kind of fun.
One of the questions I did write down was with kind of looking back at some of the experiences you had during the Tet, was it also, I'm a huge military anything fan, especially any type of series, but I'm a huge MASH fan. And how Hawkeye was always talking about, meatball surgery, and did they give somewhat of an accurate depiction of what it was like in an OR during a battlefield scenario or MASH hospital?
I think that a lot of what they showed in the MASH TV series and in the movie was pretty accurate. As you recall, what they were focusing on was the psychological reactions of people and the social interactions of people. And I had the honor of serving as president of the Southern Surgical Association, and my presidential address was entitled "The Surgical Legacies of Hawkeye Pierce." And I talked about some of the lessons that surgeons said that they learned from their experiences in combat. And a lot of it was focused on taking care of patients, but a significant proportion of it was focused on how I learned to interact with other professionals because we were in this situation together. I think the MASH TV series was, a lot of it was accurate, and a lot of the craziness that they depict in there was not as overt as it is in the show, but it was there. And and some of it was funny, but some of it was kind of sad.
Mm-hmm.
And I think every place that you went, you were really lucky if you had a Father Mulcahy around.
Mm.
And you were really lucky if you had somebody like Hawkeye Pierce to keep you sane, and make you see something that you were doing that was funny.
Yeah, because that's one of the things I always look at whenever I watch that show is, can definitely relate to some of the stuff that they're going through, but it's always good to get to that perspective of how accurate were they really, because I know he focused a lot of time, between Alan Alda and I'm trying to think of the guy who wrote the initial book. And then also Robert Altman, when they made it into the movie, they really wanted to be as accurate as possible.
Well, yeah, I think they were very accurate, and there obviously there were, you can't really graphically depict somebody taking care of an injured patient.
Right.
You do it from a 30,000-foot view, and I think what they did to kind of show what the system was, the rapid evacuation, the getting the patient to the operating room right away, that sort of thing. I think all of that was right on. And I think that they really made a pretty terrific contribution to the understanding of how things were in Vietnam, because when we came back from Vietnam, not just me, but all of us, when we came back, the welcome we got from a lot of people was, the war was your fault. How could you have participated in this war? The fact that so many people got killed was your fault because you participated. And, I remember coming into the San Francisco airport. We flew into Travis Air Force Base north of San Francisco, and they put us on the bus and took us down to the San Francisco airport to go home. And I remember people standing outside the airport yelling at us and trying to spit on us and stuff like that, and saying, you guys are savages for participating in this war. And I think shows like MASH began to tell a story to folks so that they could understand that you were there in the middle of the war. You had no choice but to participate. You either participated or you died. And I think that message that was depicted in that TV story and in the movie, that helped people understand. And I think some other movies like Platoon helped people understand what it was like, and helped people understand that it wasn't the soldiers' fault. That they had no choice in the matter.
Kind of going back to when you did get back to the States, I know a lot of times once they landed back, once they landed back in the States, they told everybody, take off your uniforms, try to be as unmilitarily as possible to try to alleviate some of the things. But it still happened. Did they ever give you that brief coming back in, or was it?
Well, they told us that we might encounter some people who were unfriendly, but we moved around in groups, so it really wasn't. We weren't ever in danger, and they had people who met us at the airport, made sure we got directly to our flight and got on our airplane, and I can't remember when I took my uniform off. I can't remember whether I did it before I got on the plane in San Francisco or when I got back to Washington, but They never told us to take your uniform off. In fact, we had to wear a uniform on the plane coming back, and then we wore the uniform that we wore in Vietnam on the plane coming back, and then we changed in Travis to a regular uniform. The episode at the San Francisco airport was really the only one that was negative that I encountered, and it was something that people just think what they think. You can't sway them with facts.
All right. And since then, you've never had any type of negative reaction since that time in San Francisco?
No, as time goes on, I mean, I have more and more people who come up to me and who, when I gave the talk, I talked about the surgical legacies of Hawkeye Pierce. I probably had 50 people come up and thank me. As time has gone on, that happens more and more often.
Well, I'm glad it is definitely happening, because I definitely do the same. Every time I see someone, especially if I know they were in Vietnam, I always throw my hand like, thank you. 'Cause you guys, when we came home, it was the exact opposite. It's almost to the point where I'm like, I didn't do anything, bye. Thank you, but let me just get home.
Right.
Whereas the exact opposite for you guys.
Yeah. Well, it was I think the one thing that the transition to the all-volunteer force has done is make people understand the magnitude of the sacrifice. Back in the Vietnam era, when we had the draft, a lot of times people served in the military because they had no choice. And now that the people who do serve do it because they have a choice, there is, I think, a better understanding of what the sacrifice is.
Like I said, we definitely very, very much thank you. I did have one quick question I wanted to ask you then. One of the, now that with you being a professor, have you had students that come up that do want to join the military? And have they come up and asked, should I join it, should I not?
I think there are, I'd say anywhere from 10 to 15% of every medical school class that have an interest in the military. Some of them have either had family in the military or they have served as enlisted people in the military or even as officers in the military, and then decided to go to medical school after they left the military. And they want to go and get trained, and then they want to go back into the military, and I think that's terrific. I tell them that my stint in the military was short, but my exposure to the military has been significant since my dad was a career military officer, and I have been around a lot of people who served in the military, so I can't speak from the perspective of somebody who's made a career of it, but I can tell you that it's a very rewarding thing to be able to practice medicine, especially surgery, in the care of people who are making a sacrifice for their country.
Outstanding. And one final question. On the Navy side of the house, we have what we call sea stories. Just like goofy anecdotes or just something that we really fondly remember. Is there any like specific fond stories that you remember when you were there, other than the first sergeant coming to tears at the shower?
Well, I think the story that I remember is a story of the care that we provided for some Vietnamese and Montagnard patients who had, two of them had cerebral malaria, and 3 of them had typhoid fever. I had never seen either disease in my whole medical career. And I have always appreciated the fact that they were there to teach me about the disease, and that there were some senior doctors there who had, one of them was in his 2nd tour in Vietnam, and he had seen some of it before, and he was willing to teach me about it. And to help me understand what the disease was like. And it was an opportunity to learn about problems that you would never see in the United States. And that was an experience that was as valuable to me as the experience of taking care of combat injuries, because I think it made me a better doctor, because I learned about types of disease that I had never seen before. I would never have seen if I hadn't been in Vietnam.
Well, looking through, I've actually went through all the different questions I have. Was there anything else that you would like to add to the story, sir? Or?
No, it's you know, I think I hate it that war has to happen, but I think war benefits people. It sure benefited me.
Amen. And that one, it's definitely gone from there. Well, with that being said, sir, we thank you for coming out, and we definitely thank you for being here for us today. And one of the things we always like to do, let me dig it out of my pocket. Whoops. Oh well, I'll get it in a minute. Is that we do the challenge coins. It's very big for the, especially on the military side of the house. You know, I don't know if it was when you were in, but you know.
No, it wasn't so much when I was there, but it was. I've come to understand it. I have 2 nephews who've been to Iraq and Afghanistan, and they have acquainted me with the custom, and it's really an old custom in the military. It was the way that people found out that you were actually an ally and not an enemy.
Yep. And we like to give that out as just a token of thank you for coming out and telling your story. Thoroughly enjoyed listening to it, and like I said, thank you for coming out and visiting with us, and thank you for taking out the time, because I know you probably stay quite busy with all your responsibilities.
Well, it was a pleasure.